You're live.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the 61st week of the Free Assange Online Vigil, coming to you live from Washington, D.C. With us today, I have our awesome co-host, Steve Poikinen, and we also have the wonderful guest, Rebecca Vincent from Reporters Without Borders. Before we introduce her, though, I do want to run through the numbers. Today is day 3,559 since the illegal and arbitrary detention of Julian Assange started. It is day 513 since the WikiLeaks founder was trafficked out of the Ecuadorian embassy following a $4.2 billion international monetary loan fund to the nation of Ecuador. Julian Assange has been held without rearrest since the new superseding indictment was issued by William Barr's Justice Department on June 24th, 2020, totaling 74 days now. We are 2 days out from Monday, which is the start of the second phase of Julian's extraordinary rendition hearing. It is 1,191 days of incarceration for whistleblower Reality Winner. In some good news, we do have 172 days of freedom for Chelsea Manning. She does have a Twitch stream, and we'll try to get that link up in the chat, but she streams Thursdays through Sundays in the evenings, Eastern time. So I would really like everyone to go over there and send some love out to her. But without any further ado, I did want to introduce our guest here, Rebecca Vincent. She is the International Director for Reporters Without Borders. How are you today, Rebecca?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
We may have some ambient noise in the background. We couldn't have our usual microphone set up for this, but we wanted to be outside because it's like the one nice day that we're going to have in DC the entire time we're here. So if there, you hear like neighbors screaming at each other or something, that's why. We'll duck if there's a gunshot, I promise. We were just talking off camera before we started about the hoops that everyone is going to have to jump through to cover this trial, in spite of the fact that at least on paper, some more access has been granted to the press in general for Julian's show trial. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Like what Reporters Without Borders is going to have to go through, and what members of the press in general are going to have to go through in order to provide accurate information about this thing?
I'm very happy to talk about this because it's been a huge source of frustration, very time-consuming issue that we've been trying to resolve, when we should be focusing now on the substance of the case against Mr. Assange, not having to fight with court officials and the UK authorities simply to try to access his hearing. Maybe I could start actually with how it was in February and sort of the frustrations with the remote trial process since, and then what is happening at the moment ahead of Monday's hearing. So in February, the court would not recognize the role of NGO observers. They did not offer us a way of being accredited to observe the first week of this hearing, which took place at Woolwich Crown Court in London. We were left to have to compete for very few spaces in the public gallery because, as Reporters Without Borders, although we have reporters in our name, we're a non-governmental organization. We don't attend trials as journalists. We attend as professional NGO observers. So there were only 20 spaces in the public gallery at that court, and some of those were allocated to Julian Assange's family, rightly so. But that meant, I believe we had 14 seats most days. And obviously this case is of such tremendous public interest, international public interest. There were activists who had traveled from other countries, many people trying to gain access to the courtroom. So the only way to gain access at that time was to turn up extremely early and queue and hope for the best. So I did that every day that week. It was February, so it was very cold. I think the latest that I got there was around 6 a.m. Just about managed to get in every day, but it was not easy, and I think intentionally so. And once you were in, that did not guarantee that you would keep your seat, because you had no right to your seat. You couldn't leave things there. So every time the court rose for any reason, even a short break, if you went to the toilet, if you tried to get a bite to eat, you might not get back in. So that was that week. I managed to gain access to each sitting. And it was important to be there in person, not just because there was no other option to get the information remotely at the time, but also to get a sense of the atmospherics in the courtroom, to have sight of Julian, who did not look well, and we had very many concerns about his treatment at that time. You know, and to just be able to accurately assess the entire process, because NGO observers have an important role to play in open justice. So, of course, the lockdown started a couple of weeks after that, and the administrative hearings that continued then could not take place in person. So a telephone line was made available, and that was the only means of gaining access. Again, we weren't really recognized as NGO observers, so another organization kind of played intermediary and helped us. We were given the dial-in information that journalists were also given. But when it worked, it was hardly sufficient to hear what was going on. At times, you could only hear possibly the judge speaking, not the lawyers. It was interrupted by other observers and journalists coming and going and announcing it, conference call style, which was very distracting. And 3 different hearings out of, I think there have been a total of maybe 6 or 7 administrative hearings in this time. 3 of those, the court failed to connect the telephone line to the court at all, and we were just left on the line. So that's what we've been dealing with. I've been working with a group of other NGOs who have faced similar frustrations. We've been working together to reach out to the court and to UK authorities well in advance of now what will resume on Monday, and have basically been told the same thing, that we can take our chances with the public gallery. But now, because of COVID measures, there will only be, we're told, 8 spaces available in the public gallery. So we don't know if we'll be able to gain access. Now, we've been given the right to access this video platform, which is also being offered to members of the media, but that's been severely restricted as well to 1 representative of each organization. Given the fact that this will go on for 3 or 4 weeks, that's very difficult for one person to be able to fully monitor every moment of this hearing. And there seem to be a number of restrictions around having to start at a certain time. And if you don't get there by, I think, 9:40 a.m. every day, you will not access the hearing at all that day. So it's difficult, although the fact that there is this video stream being made available is an improvement over February. But we're looking at, I think, what will be another very frustrating process. And the technical difficulties that we've had so far with the phone line don't inspire confidence about what we can expect in the days ahead. I hope that it will go smoother than what we fear could be the case.
Can we put this in a little bit of context, or is this unique to this specific trial? Like, do you have these problems when you observe other court proceedings, or like how does that work out as an NGO, as an international observer?
I personally have never faced such extensive problems monitoring any case in any country, nor have my colleagues at Reporters Without Borders. And I mean, including countries that have a far poorer record than the UK when it comes to press freedom, when it comes to rule of law, countries like Turkey. I mean, so I have not extensively monitored many trials in the United Kingdom, but when I have, I've not had trouble gaining access, although it was perhaps because they weren't as highly attended. And so it seems to be this reluctance in the system to recognize that actually there is a role for professional observers. Perhaps to court officials here, it's unusual, but in the international system, it's not unusual. This is a very common thing internationally for non-governmental organizations to observe trials of concern. And there are many reasons for concern in Mr. Assange's case. It is really essential that it be open to scrutiny, not just by the few people who can get into the courtroom here, but by the world. I mean, his prosecution will have serious implications for journalism, for press freedom in the US, in the UK, and internationally. And the public has a right to know how this trial is being conducted, and he, in his own defense, has the right for this to be open to scrutiny.
Now, there are people who tell us all the time, like, you should be concerned about, something else. This is just, this isn't that big a deal. Maybe, here in the States, like, maybe focus on Medicare for all, or maybe focus on the Green New Deal. And our response to that is always, if there's no free press, it doesn't matter what you advocate, because what you advocate won't have a chance to get out into the public consciousness if we're, in a situation where investigative journalism pays the ultimate price because you guys let Julian Assange pay the ultimate price. Do you experience similar frustrations, like at the NGO level, when you're trying to communicate with other organizations about the importance of this? Like, what kind of stumbling blocks do you run into?
Well, I think this is a very complicated case. It's a very complex case, and perhaps more of a divisive case than many that I've worked on. I think over the last year, there has been sort of more of a recognition again from the free expression community of the need to speak out in Mr. Assange's defense. I think there have been some intentional distractions, deflections, obfuscations throughout this case. The position of our governments is very worrying. So this is possibly the first level of the frustrations here is I think it's hard for many people to accept what is happening, which is the political targeting of somebody by countries that are not meant to do this, by countries that are meant to be democratic and abide by the rule of law. It's difficult here in the UK for people to understand, and it's difficult in the United States. I have noted a real lack of public sympathy, particularly in these two countries, the UK and the US, for him. A bit different than other parts of the world. I think in continental Europe, there does seem to be more of a public outcry and more pressure from those states. But the countries at the epicenter of this, I feel that our governments are largely getting away with this because of that lack of sort of public outcry. And that's why things like access to the hearing make a big difference, because we need this information to come to the light. It needs to be clear what exactly our states are doing and why. Our governments need to recognize as well that whether or not they consider him to be a journalist, this case has huge implications for press freedom. I see what I view as a deliberate attempt to sort of make it about other things, because it's, it makes it harder for them to get away with it when organizations like ours are advocating in his support. I've been directly told by representatives of the UK government that this is not a media freedom issue, but it very much is. And so I think that's a challenge that we have as campaigners, is to make it clear exactly what's at the heart of this case, regardless of what people think about Julian Assange himself, regardless of what they feel, their countries normally do in the way that we normally behave. This is happening, and it's very alarming, because this will not stop with the persecution of Julian Assange. It will have implications that will be felt for many years to come.
Well, the apathy and ignorance within the US and the UK, I think it really has to do with the fact that those are two of the largest of the Five Eyes nations. And the US in particular is the most propagandized population in the world. So I think that has a large amount to do with it, because they've spent the last 10 years dragging Julian's name and WikiLeaks' name through the mud. They had thousands of agents across multiple intelligence groups, specifically targeting him. They had the operations with Stratfor, with UC Global, HB Gary. So it's what we're standing at right now is basically an epicenter to see how effective U.S. propaganda has been to destroy this man, but also the resilience of the human spirit, and on an individual level and on a collective level, because there's so much that in people's personal lives, if they're trying to support Julian, that they either get no support or pushback from other groups. And it's largely because a lot of the smears and everything that went around behind the scenes for the last decade. But one of the big questions I did want to bring up with you is the Espionage Act in and of itself, because it's something that has been used to target anti-war voices from its very first inception. But this is the first time that it's being used to target a journalist. And there's an article that we're going to get to here in a little bit, but it kind of turns this entire process on its head, where it looks at it from the lens of, if it were the Chinese government requesting that the UK hold a reporter in remand so that way he can be sent back to China to face crimes for reporting on those things that happen over there. So if you could you talk a little bit about the Espionage Act, and then also about the way the court systems are allowing this to happen?
Sure. And I think it's worth maybe looking first at the broader press freedom context. So the situation in the US has been very steadily deteriorating under the Trump administration. We have a World Press Freedom Index where we rank 180 countries in terms of their performance, and the US has slipped to 45th out of 180 countries, which is frankly not good enough for the country of the First Amendment. And it's because of these sorts of cases. So the Espionage Act has been at the heart of a number of other cases of concern for us, not journalists, but whistleblowers and journalistic sources. The law itself lacks a public interest defense, which is a crucial aspect of why they're able to manipulate it in this way to try to silence informing critical reporting. So we've recently issued a series of 8 press freedom recommendations to candidates ahead of the upcoming elections in November. And one of our key recommendations is to Congress to amend that law and to ensure that it is not used to prosecute journalists, whistleblowers, and other journalistic sources. But the problem, as well as the sort of international implications, so this is alarming in and of itself in the United States, but the US still, for better or worse, plays an international standard setting role. And when, again, as the country of the First Amendment, which is supposed to have the strongest protections for press freedom in the world, is behaving in this way, that sets a really worrying precedent for others. And it is noted and it is used and abused by others to enact repression in their own countries.
Yeah, we've seen it, actually, a similar case be brought up against Glenn Greenwald, or Max Blumenthal, for his work out exposing the crimes in Brazil.
No, that was Greenwald.
Yeah.
It was Greenwald. Yes, we actually did speak out in defense of Glenn Greenwald in that case as well. That was quite alarming. And I'm not up to speed on the latest, but that is exactly the same pattern. You're right.
Yeah, and one of the things, though, that you guys did is you put out a petition to deliver to the UK court system on behalf of, or in support of, Julian Assange. Could you talk a little bit about kind of what inspired that and how it's been coming along and what your plans are with it?
So the petition will actually it's addressed to the UK authorities rather than the court system itself because of judicial independence. We wouldn't direct a call like that directly to the court, but there are political implications of this, and there are political powers that it was a political decision by the UK Home Office to greenlight the extradition request that allowed it to become a matter before the courts in the first place. And we believe that there is still a degree of political responsibility here by this government. So our call is on the UK government. We started this petition earlier this year ahead of the commencement of the extradition hearing in February. And the call is on the UK not to comply with the US extradition request. So we have other calls. We call for Mr. Assange's immediate release. We call for the charges against him to be dropped and this constant persecution stopped. But this particular petition, the call is on the UK authorities not to extradite him. We now have over 80,000 signatures, so we will be delivering it on Monday morning to 10 Downing Street, where the Prime Minister works. We understand that they will not accept it at the door because they are not currently accepting petitions because of a reduced staff in light of COVID measures. So I will be attempting to hand it over along with my colleague, the director of RSF Germany, who's coming, and Julian Assange's partner, Stella Morris, will accompany us. We'll be attempting to hand it over at least at the gate because regardless of staffing issues at Downing Street at the moment, the Prime Minister cannot ignore this call by 80,000 people to stop this political case against Mr. Assange.
So with your calls here for the US to amend the actual Espionage Act, I would love to find a way to partner with Reporters Without Borders for that, because we have a pretty well-engaged audience that's pretty good at sending information to different people. So that may be something that we can participate alongside of you, is getting this information out specifically to the candidates and elected officials right now. In a mass kind of way.
He's being pretty humble. We have hands down the best and most active audience in terms of like boots on the ground participation. They're fantastic.
Well, I'll be happy to send you the full recommendations, and what we've been doing is sending them to all congressional candidates. So any help in kind of promoting those with those who are standing for office right now will be particularly relevant. And we hope that the presidential candidates will also take note. So far, we cannot pretend that the Democratic Party has had a perfect record on these issues either, because under the Obama administration, there was a number of the patterns that we're still dealing with now were started in terms of the attitude towards surveillance and hostility towards whistleblowers. But ultimately, the Obama administration did not pursue these, excuse me, did not pursue this case actively against Mr. Assange. So we would call on on Mr. Biden, if elected, to break from what the Trump administration has done in this case and to not pursue it, as Obama himself did not.
No, I tend to look at the situation with Obama a little bit differently, and this is just largely because I'm more cynical. A lot of people give his administration credit in all of this for not going after Julian. But what a lot of people don't realize when they say that is it's actually illegal in the United States for any federal law enforcement agency to even go as far as to write a dossier on a journalist. So that plus all of the investigations and all of these other things that were
Secret grand
juries, and then the use of the Espionage Act to build the legal framework in laying out how a reporter or journalist could be prosecuted with the Espionage Act by tying them with a conspiracy charge to the source in and of itself. I don't see it as Trump doing something the Obama administration didn't. I see him continuing the same war as the same way that Obama continued the Bush wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Well, and Biden's on record calling Julian a high-tech terrorist. And this is 72 hours after Mitch McConnell called Julian a high-tech terrorist. There's a bipartisanship there that George Carlin perfectly described when he said bipartisan means that a larger than normal deception is taking place.
No, that's all very fair. And even not just with this case, but the climate, this sort of deterioration of press freedom, it started before Trump. And so I think that's something that we would highlight is the US government in general. This has been a very negative trend. And if they are successful,
not just in the recent years.
Yes, of course. But I mean, yes, of course. But we're looking at, more modern history and sort of the active cases that we're working on. And if they are successful in getting Julian Assange into the US and prosecuting him, that will be, I think, the start of a even worse, very slippery slope, not just for other whistleblowers and journalists in the US, but internationally will have a huge chilling effect. And I think we will start to see in most countries around the world, publishers become very reluctant, very afraid of publishing any leaked information. These are, and ultimately these are stories in the public interest. So it's the public that then does not have access to information that it should. So I think that's something missing in the narrative around the Assange case, is that it is ultimately the public that suffers. It is not only the persecution of this one individual, but what that means for everybody. And that means that all of us will have less access to information that will allow us to hold our governments to account.
Is that what has sparked the work that Reporters Without Borders is doing to specifically have the Espionage Act modified?
Well, because
about that a little bit, because that was fascinating.
So our mandate is, of course, press freedom, and I think the Espionage Act is problematic beyond just our specific mandate, but it's the sort of implications that it has for journalism and for journalists, and we also defend journalistic sources, and so it's that, and that is at the heart of much that we do, not just with regard to the Espionage Act, but it's ultimately about the public's. We say right to information. We're headquartered in Paris, and so we're an international, but a French international organization. And the way the French concept of freedom of information is more the right to inform and to be informed. And so it gets at that. If you undermine journalism, if you put undue restrictions on journalism and on journalists, it is that public's right to information that way that is ultimately harmed. So and that will always have implications beyond the specific country in question.
So I don't know the exact wording of how the UK does it, but in the United States, freedom of association is tied directly to freedom of the press, to where assuming that when someone receives factual information, if they choose to act upon it, they have that right to freely assemble and freely gather. And a big concern that I have, especially coming into Julian's trial, is that globally we have seen this freedom of association violated. And in the UK, it's gotten to the point, like we were talking about in the beginning, where they're not even allowing people into the courtroom in a real fashion, or they're only allowing a small handful of reporters and a small handful of people in the public gallery. So that's a really disturbing trend as those two issues kind of go hand in hand with one another. But one of the big things, there was an article that got put up on RSF's website that was published yesterday, I believe. And let me pull that up here real quick. I wanted to kind of run through that with you because I thought it was really, really well written. And this is the renews their call for the WikiLeaks publishers' extradition hearing to end. Do you want to run through that, Steve?
So we have this pulled up on screen, but basically you guys, when I say you guys, Rebecca, I'm talking about Reporters Without Borders here. You released this statement saying, as his extradition hearing resumes, we call yet again for Julian Assange to be immediately released and the charges against him dropped, and for him to not be extradited to the United States. We fully believe the case against him is connected to his contributions to public interest reporting, and his prosecution has extremely worrying implications for press freedom and the protection of journalistic sources internationally. The US and UK governments must drop this politically motivated case before their press freedom records are further tarnished. And that's a direct quote from you.
Yeah.
Hopefully, because we're going to throw this link into the chat, hopefully we can help get this circulated. And what did you want to address,
I just thought it was worth mentioning for the audience and being able to put the link out in there.
Yeah, thank you. We're trying to reiterate this call at every opportunity. I mean, these are the points that we've been making, but now it's coming to a really crucial juncture as this, final 3 or 4 weeks of evidence will wrap up the this particular process. So we would encourage all of those who care about free expression, who care about human rights, who care about all of, even human dignity, to take a stand now. Now is the time, I think, for more unity. I think for more solidarity with the journalistic community, with NGOs, with others, that any hesitation, any sort of reluctance, I think now is the time to put those differences aside, to really focus on the core of this issue, the implications that it will have, and to speak out now and to put pressure on those in power who have the power to actually make a difference now. Now is the time, not later.
So we had, I can't remember his last name, but a French journalist named Victor Dedage on with us a couple weeks back, and he asked us,
he scolded us.
I try to use as nice words as possible for using the word extradition in general. That we, as the Free Assange community, shouldn't engage in the language of empire, because the words we can use are way stronger in describing this process. Do you think there's any way that we can start getting NGOs and international organizations to start referring to Julian's situation as an extraordinary rendition?
If not a broad daylight kidnapping.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's different roles that are played by professional NGOs and by grassroots activists. And I think there's room for all of these roles. And I understand people's frustration, particularly that have been working in a grassroots way on this case from the very beginning. The way that we work as an international NGO is very rooted in the international legal framework. And so we would focus on the legal charges, which are at the moment, the legal process that we're looking at is an extradition process. So we use that language because ultimately we're engaging with states, and we're trying to change a state's behavior now. And so we're engaging in that way. But I certainly understand, I understand other perspectives here. And again, I think that there is room for all of these different perspectives. Our focus is the journalistic implications, it's the press freedom implications, but there's many other reasons and areas for concerns and space for raising this in many different ways. So I would personally support everybody's right to freedom of expression, to freedom of assembly, to freedom of association in this case. And I think more attention is helpful from all of these different sectors.
On Wednesday or Thursday of this coming week, we're going to be taking part in a panel discussion with Dan Ellsberg and Chris Hedges and Jacob Goodale, and it's specifically for journalists. Would Reporters Without Borders be interested in watching this, taking part in it, or would you help us get it out to the journalistic community in general?
I'm happy to have a look at what you're planning, and I would personally be interested in at least watching it, depending on what if it's conflicting with the actual hearing. I'm going to be
It
trying
won't
to
be.
get into the courtroom this week if I can.
It'll be
But
like
yeah,
3 o'clock in the afternoon East Coast time, which will be well past.
evening here.
Yeah, so it'll be
Well,
like or
sure, share the information with me, and I'll see what I can do. Of course, it's hard to capture journalists' attention on any of these kind of events just because people are so busy. And I think those who are already interested in this case will be so busy with the hearing. So what you want is to reach out to people who aren't already watching and following and talking about this case. That's really hard to do. I think really we need to find ways, as everybody who supports, Julian Assange in different ways. I think we need to find more ways to get through to those who are very skeptical. And something that I've been trying to speak about a bit more is the power and the strength in being able to change one's mind. Because this case, more than most that I've ever worked on, people really do have very strong feelings one way or the other. And sometimes it is not grounded in fact. Sometimes it's grounded in a perception that was formed very quickly a long time ago, because of course this has been over a decade in the making. And it takes a very open mind, and it takes strength of character sometimes to challenge our own biases, to recognize that sometimes maybe we haven't always made the right call, and to admit sometimes if we have reconsidered something and taken a different position. I think that would make the biggest difference that I can see in this case is if people, intelligent people who share our values, take a moment to actually reflect now, not on what they thought 10 years ago or 5 years ago or 2 years ago, but look at the facts now, look at the case now, look what is happening, what our countries may get away with and the implications for that, and reassess now. And don't be afraid to admit if you do change your mind. I've heard Niels Meltzer speak a number of times, and he's very powerful on this too, the UN Special Rapporteur for Torture, and how he's spoken a lot about how he initially didn't want to take up the case and his own process of coming to these realizations. And his work is very much worth reading, the investigations and reportings he's done as well. I think there are very credible voices here, people who are acknowledging having challenged their own biases and coming to this conclusion. And I think that's needed with journalists. I think that's needed, with governments and the individuals within them. These are not always monolithic entities. And I think there are individuals in these systems can make a difference. So I think if anything now, that's my message. And as activists, as journalists, as NGO representatives, that's now what we should be looking at, is how to more effectively change the narrative and engage people who are skeptical and get them to reconsider their positions.
Well, one of the things that we've set out to do since the very beginning of Action for Assange and the Free Assange Vigil is build a network with independent media creators, whether they're print, whether they do video. And we've gotten a lot of pushback and not very much support from many independent content creators out there. And I don't know how closely Reporters Without Borders works with independent and self-funded content creators. But could you talk a little bit maybe about like the state of independent media right now and kind of the effect that like the ad-based model of corporate platforms has in regulating the content that independent creators put out?
Well, I think independent media are under attack all around the world. I mean, that is kind of bread and butter work that we're doing everywhere. Obviously, there are economic challenges. There are so many unprecedented situations that are kind of converging. We put out an analysis when we publish our World Press Freedom Index each year, and this year's analysis, it was in April. It's usually done within about 2 weeks before World Press Freedom Day, which is on the 3rd of May. And that was the focus of our analysis this year, because we take this moment to look at a snapshot of the state of press freedom in the world. And it was exactly this. It was these converging crises, economic, geopolitical, financial crisis, and technology so rapidly changing, and the sort of failure of international legal framework to catch up properly with those challenges. So I'd say it's never been a more challenging time for independent media than now, and we're seeing the implications of that in different ways in many countries around the world. And our democracies are not exempt. This is going hand in hand with a sort of deteriorating press freedom environment in many countries that have been thought of as standard setters as well. So I guess that's kind of a macro answer to your question, but that is kind of the backdrop of many of these cases that we're working on in many country contexts, is this sort of erosion and the difficulty in independent media sort of functioning in the way that they once did.
We have 3 weeks of protests planned here in DC during the time of Julian's extradition hearing. And one of the things that we're doing is trying to impress upon the establishment media in and of itself. I was trying to think of a better word than that, but I'll try to be polite. That they are next. That once Julian gets taken, brought to the US, and put in Guantanamo Bay or some other black site torture facility, that it's a matter of time before these mainstream journalists have these effects used against them, to where what will in the future be considered the Assange precedent will either allow for federal governments around the world to target journalists from other countries for exposing their crimes, or it will put a bastion up to say, no, this is where the goalpost for free speech has been set. Now let's move it forward again. So could you talk maybe a little bit about your concerns with the legal precedent that would be set if his extradition does go through, but also the legal precedents that would get set if it is denied? Because that's a position a lot of people don't really talk about, is if we are successful in stopping it, what those international repercussions could potentially be.
That's actually a really interesting exercise, because you're right. We're focusing so much on this assumption that this will be successful. And I think that's because of precedent in this case, because of the behavior of governments so far. I think most of us fear the worst, and I think are prepared for the worst. But absolutely, if, let's say, that the court ruled against this, I guess we would have to see then what happens. He would obviously need to be given safe refuge somewhere. I'm not sure that the United Kingdom is the best place for that, if they would be the most willing to. But it's that if the court system overturned this, that would be very powerful, because that would show that that these political maneuverings by states could not be effective. Another scenario would be that the UK at a political level refuses to extradite him, right? And that would be a powerful statement as well. I'm a dual national. I live here in London, but I'm a dual US-UK national. So I'm frankly ashamed of the behavior of both of my governments in this particular case. I would be very proud of the UK in taking that stand, because we assume that they're under tremendous pressure by the Americans to hand him over. That would be powerful, not just in terms of how it would play out domestically here, but it would show the US that it cannot just behave in that way and do these things in the world, that they cannot target people in this way. So I think a failure to extradite him and a failure to prosecute him in the US would actually proactively create protections for journalists going forward, because this has been such a strong test of that. Now, if he is extradited and if he is prosecuted, that's extremely worrying. I mean, you're right that it should be of concern to every journalist, because I think, as I said earlier, this will not stop with Julian Assange. We, I think, would be likely to see other similar cases, and of course, there's pending cases in the United States with cases against other whistleblowers, for example, that have similar worrying implications. But I think this would be viewed as carte blanche to pursue others in this way, and not just in the United States. Of course, where does this international reach stop if they are successful? But something I also worry about is the chilling effect, because that's harder to measure. I am convinced, after I've been working 15 years in this field, I'm convinced that the biggest global challenge to free expression is self-censorship. Mm-hmm. And that is incredibly difficult to measure, to pinpoint, to counter, because it happens in many ways, sometimes very obvious ways and sometimes very subtle ways. And it's not just in authoritarian countries. This happens in very subtle ways in our democracies. But that is nearly impossible to effectively address if widespread self-censorship takes hold. And individual journalists would certainly think twice about running with stories that were based on leaked information. I think media outlets would become even more risk adverse in publishing these stories. And again, ultimately, it is then the public that we won't get stories about, really worrying behaviors and actions of our governments. We won't be as informed. We won't be as able to hold our governments to account and make informed decisions as electorates. That has such worrying implications for democracy, not just journalism, not just press freedom. And that's really at stake here, are these broader things. And I think that's hard for people to grasp when you look at a case that's so in the spotlight, but in such a superficial way. It's such a complicated case that you really have to follow it with such great detail to understand all of these nuances. I think many people, almost everyone, will have heard of him at this point and have made a snap judgment. It might be based just on a headline, right? But when you form these snap judgments, when you decide whether or not somebody is a journalist, whether or not you like somebody, whether or not you believe other things about them, it's hard then to make that transfer from that initial snap judgment about this one individual to these really big worrying things that are actually at stake. So I think that's somehow what has to be challenged. And I think the media have a big role to play, I think, in the coverage of this case, not even just historically, but now in this moment and moving forward. And we hope to see more in-depth coverage and more attention, not just in the UK, as this process will take place in the UK over the next few weeks, but internationally.
We've kept you for about 45 minutes. I don't know how much time you have left. If you have to bounce, just let us know. And we'll close you out of here. But I want to Reporters Without Borders did something with Minecraft that is incredibly unique, and it inspired us. So your organization put together an archive of like banned or censored journalists. Do I have that bit right?
Articles that had been banned or censored in their countries of origin. So this is our German section that did it, and it's really incredible. It's very creative, and I love to see these creative means of circumventing censorship.
So
we're very proud of that.
What our tech guy here, Sleepy Josh, and a couple of the people involved with Unity for Jay and Action for Assange are doing is building a WikiLeaks library for Minecraft. And just kind of piggybacking off of that idea, because there really isn't, there's nothing like what you guys have done. And so we're trying to piggyback off of that to have a complete digital archive inside of Minecraft. And our guest just last Tuesday built the first, to our knowledge, online WikiLeaks bibliography. So that's going to be more interactive and more incorporated. I don't really have a question for that. I just wanted to bring it up because I think it's really freaking cool.
It is really cool, and I love that. I love that our project inspired that. I will tell you very briefly about another project that we have too that I'm very proud of, and maybe it could inspire some other thinking as well. We have a global project called Collateral Freedom, that basically, and I am not a tech person, so everybody tech that's watching, please forgive me here. But we try to unblock blocked websites in their country contexts by tacking them onto bigger servers, to where if those states then wanted to continue to block them, they'd have to take down the whole server. So whether that's Yahoo or something bigger. So kind of the opposite context of collateral damage, it's collateral freedom. To allow these bigger websites to operate, they then have to allow this mirror site to continue to operate. So there's more information about which sites we've helped so far today on our website, but that's another sort of use. I'm really proud when RSF is able to find creative uses of technology to help circumvent censorship and get quality journalism accessible to populations who have been deprived of it.
I think that is absolutely an incredible idea, because then it basically puts it in the hands of the intelligence communities of how badly they want this information removed. So I think that's awesome. I did want to ask, though, with everything going on around Julian's case, can you think of another instance where one government has extradited someone who is not a citizen from one country to another for any type of reporting or disclosure of information?
Off the top of my head, I can't think of such a similar example. We have dealt with states extraditing individuals, of course. We've seen, for example, abuse of the Interpol system, states taking out red notices erroneously on journalists and sometimes successful in extraditing them back to their countries. There is a outrageous case in Azerbaijan that I can think of where a journalist, an Azerbaijani national journalist, he wasn't extradited, he was abducted from Georgia, resurfaced in Azerbaijan, and then was politically charged there, including with illegal border crossing, even though he had been kidnapped. So we've seen some really outrageous, examples of states getting at their own nationals. But I don't want to give a definitive answer here because I'm just thinking of, what comes to mind immediately. I cannot think of another case like Mr. Assange's where it's a state going after somebody of another nationality and in a completely different country context as this. So it's unusual, highly unusual to say the least.
I mean, this is not just the US going after an Australian citizen for publishing out of Iceland. It's the US, the UK, Ecuador. There are multiple world governments involved. Even the complete ignoring of the situation entirely by the Australian government. Like there multiple world governments have converged on this one human with this one outlet with the sole purpose of stopping the proliferation of accurate information. And that's something that, chills me to the core. Not just as an activist, but as somebody who enjoys, reading and having access to information. Oh God, I had a question and then I got up for a second and I completely forgot what it was. I'm going on like 8 hours of sleep from the last 3 days. I had to evacuate my home in California because of the wildfire like 2 weeks ago. Was shuffled around all over the state for about 2 weeks and then got on a plane. So I'm a little bit scattered and I apologize for that. God damn it. What was I going to say?
Well, the one thing I did want to ask, because you talked about it a little bit in the beginning. And this is the way that the court is interacting with the public and with journalists. Mm-hmm. And you had mentioned that you hadn't really, in a Western country or in most others, ran into a government behaving in this way for access for reporters and non-governmental organizations. Could you think of, and maybe, I don't know if you want to like name names of cases, but a situation where you were excluded or your organization was excluded this much from court proceedings from a major case like this?
No, I've personally never had this issue. The cases that I've monitored before, sometimes if there's a crowded courtroom, there's always the chance that not everybody will get in. But I have to say, the more authoritarian states actually tend to behave more respectfully towards us. And make sure to allow us in because they understand in the international system what role NGO observers play. So even in very clear examples of show trials in states like I think I mentioned Turkey earlier, we've done extensive trial monitoring in Turkey. That is, those cases are not legitimate, but yet they still treat NGO observers with respect and give us access. So there's two levels of things going on here in the UK. It's sort of the court itself and what is in its control, and then it's like the political decision-making process, right? And so we've addressed this with both, and the court officials at the moment are responding to us and are offering this this video access, which is an improvement, but there's still this underlying just failure to even recognize our role and to accommodate that, which is why we've also addressed it at a political level. So because clearly the decision needs to be made elsewhere, and then the instructions given to the court to allow NGO observers, which at the moment they're not blocking us, but they're not accommodating us, right? So, but essentially, when you only have 8 spots that will be available, that is essentially. It's not going to be the professional NGO observers who can camp outside on the street every night for 3 or 4 weeks to gain access, which is what will be required. In February, I did not camp out, but I think I had about 2 or 3 hours of sleep all that week to get myself out there, to be in the queue. It was cold, it was raining, like creature comforts went out the door, whatever. That was difficult. By the time you got in, you had been frozen and sort of just standing there for hours, to where when you then have a job to do, when you're trying to follow quite complex legal arguments about issues like extradition law, I'm not an expert in extradition law, it's very difficult to be able to adequately do your job. And then again, knowing that if you so much as need the toilet, you might not get back in. That was very difficult. And there's just been so many things in this case related to that to me at this point, and we've raised them so vocally, it seems to me that it cannot just be a matter of kind of not being aware. We've made them aware of it. So it almost feels like a deliberate attempt to make it as difficult as possible to follow this case, which, if that's true, that's really alarming. And it's not just us. You mentioned journalists as well. I've heard the same. What we have heard, and we will need to see what is the situation in person on Monday. But we have heard that only 10 journalists have been accredited to attend in person, and that the others are being sent to this video platform as well. That's hardly sufficient for a case of such tremendous international interest. And we don't know who else will be in the courtroom, but and of course, understandably, all governments are having to make provisions for distancing in light of COVID measures, but they've had months to prepare for this. Based on February, they knew the level of interest there would be in this. And unless we are pleasantly surprised early next week, I have to say, like, we are not expecting to be accommodated in a way that will allow for sufficient monitoring of this process.
So to kind of piggyback off of that, or off the idea of how other courts have interacted with similar cases, Magistrate Barrister and Arbanath have been demonstrable, where they've essentially just been concierge to the State Department and what in the US 100 years ago was referred to as a hanging judge. Have you ever seen such coordination between a separate governmental entity, in this case the United States, with the home court, to where the magistrate will literally meet with the prosecution before making decisions and will have pre-prepared statements about every motion the defense brings? Have you ever seen anything along those lines in any type of court, not even just necessarily in a Western country?
I wouldn't consider myself an expert in sort of that level of detail, sort of in the behind the scenes proceedings that happen here, but and I don't particularly want to comment specifically on the judge. We hope that justice will be done here. That is optimistically what we hope will happen in this case. But the process does seem very harsh. I have to say there were aspects of February that small decisions that could have been made that would have made things much easier for Mr. Assange himself, and more able for him to then participate properly in his own proceedings. I was concerned to note that on several occasions, proceedings started before he was even present in the glass box at the back of the courtroom, almost like he was an afterthought. I was concerned to see how often he was signaling that he couldn't really hear. There was a request made by the defense for him to be brought out of this bulletproof glass box where violent criminals and terrorists are held. There was a request for him to be brought into the well of the court so he could hear properly, so that he could speak properly, confer with his own legal team. And a point of interest there is that the US did not contest that. They did not have a problem with him with that, but the judge still ruled against it. So there were many things like that hinted to like very harsh application of the rules in that context. So what I will say is we're concerned in general by his treatment, and not just physically in court, by the conditions that he's being held in Belmarsh, with his underlying health issues. We've talked a lot about the possible risk of exposure to COVID, which we're concerned about. We were concerned by reports in February of what seems to be punitive treatment of Mr. Assange while the hearing was ongoing that week. Excessive strip searches, moving around to different holding cells, his legally privileged materials being confiscated. And since then, very severe restrictions on visitations. He's only been recently allowed to see his family for the first time in 6 months and has not had in-person access to his legal team. And it's worth mentioning as well that materials, so I understand that although this hearing will resume on Monday, that he has still not had the chance to read the new extradition request, which the US filed at quite a late stage. So there's all of these things that the system can and should be doing better than it is, which creates the impression of things being stacked against him. And I would hope that, knowing the tremendous public interest value of this case, that the governments involved, that the prisons involved, that the court systems involved would be on their absolute best behavior and absolutely making sure to adhere to the highest standards, which does not always seem to be what's happening in practice here.
Damn it. There we go. Rebecca, Vincent, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be here with us. We respect the hell out of the organization and the work that you're doing. Hopefully we can do this again. Will you please leave our audience with some final thoughts and where they can stay on top of everything that you and Reporters Without Borders are up to?
Sure. I mean, well, my final thought, I think, would be that, like, again, now is the time for expressions of solidarity. Now is the time for unity. Now is the time for everybody who cares about all of these values at stake to speak out and to raise these issues with their own policy makers, because there is power in that. In terms of following things, I will mention that our petition is still open for signature. So we will be delivering it on Monday morning, but it's still open for signature. So that can be found on our website, rsf.org. I believe it's like /free Assange. If you go to our homepage, it's at the center at the top at the moment. So it's very easy to find our petition. Please add your name to it, and we will include that in what we hand over to the UK authorities on Monday morning. And please follow these proceedings closely. I'm pretty active on social media. I'll be tweeting and etc. next week. I'm hoping we can get into the courtroom. And if not, we will be making quite a fuss about that. But we'll be following the substance of the hearing closely if this video system does work as promised. And we will comment as we go forward. We're in this for the long haul as well. And if this goes to appeal, we will be there. I mean, given the past history of complications in this case, I think it is likely that this is not going to be a short-lived process. So we appreciate anybody following us, and you know, you can find our contacts easily online too. And in fact, even is this tacky to just say that you can donate to Reporters Without Borders as well?
No, I'm going for it.
We need resources to do this kind of work too. So even small donations are very gratefully received, and that can all be done via our website as well. So thank you so much for having me, and please do share information about your program. I think you said that was coming up on Wednesday, and I will share with you our 8 recommendations for press freedom and these things that we've discussed. But we appreciate any activism around that from your networks as well.
Well, thank you again for joining us.
Thanks very much.
So let's go find what article we're going to jump into first.
Well, before we do, I want to talk about the video link a little bit. Because,
that's right.
Because as we were able to just outline with Rebecca, there are still problems with court attendance and with the way everything is rolling out with Julian's case. But I want to give a big credit to the audience and to everyone helping us with our actions. So it's going to take a second to get this pulled up here. But Steve is going to pull this up. And when we first received this, I didn't even believe that it was true.
It's true. We had people check it out. Like, go run it for, you know, scan it for what the hell.
So I got to DC on probably like 6 o'clock in the morning on Friday after a heinous drive, 2 hours of literally sitting still on a highway sleeping because of traffic. And I got an email, and it says it's from HMCTS customer service, and it is customer investigations at justice.uk.gov. And it says, "Dear Sir or Madams, please find attached response to the letters received at the Ministry of Justice from the supporters of the Action for Assange campaign's 18 August call for action demanding the hearings be heard. And do you have that up on screen share?
Yeah.
Cool. Do you want to read through that?
Dear sirs and madams, I'm not going to do that. Writing in response to the letters received at the Ministry of Justice from supporters of the Action for Assange campaign's 18th August call to action for a demand the hearing be heard concerning the upcoming hearing of Julian Assange, which is due to take place at Central Criminal Court on 7 September. And the provision, I really want to read this in the voice of Mafalda Hopkirk from Harry Potter, who writes the little screaming letters at people. I'm not going to do that, but God, I want to. And the provision for reporters to have remote access to the hearing by audio and video technology. I'm replying on behalf of Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service as the agency at the Ministry of Justice that is responsible for the administration of the courts. I understand that Action for Assange campaign supporters want to be sure that these proceedings are transparent and open to the public. I'm sorry that members of the media and public who attended the hearing of 14 August remotely were disconnected from the hearing. This shouldn't have happened, I understand, has caused concerns for the upcoming final hearing. Space in the public gallery is limited and was allocated on a first-come, first-served basis. Separate seating allocation and arrangements were put in place for accredited journalists. However, some could not be accommodated due to the limited number of space available at the court building. This case has attracted a vast amount of both media and public interest, and as a result, the Central Criminal Court is unable to accommodate the many requests received to attend court from journalists and non-governmental organizations, which has been limited due to social distancing measures in place with the Public Health England guidance. The upcoming hearing will be made available for accredited members of the media to access virtually using the cloud video platform. This will ensure there are no further access issues. There will be a small number of press seats available at the court, and a ticketing system will be in place to manage requests for those accredited media who want to attend in person. Those accredited journalists will also need to apply for a ticket to event virtually via the cloud platform. The Ministry of Justice Press Office has sent an operational notice to journalists and media agencies to notify them of the process for applying for a ticket. The public gallery will be open for members of the public and observers. However, once again, spaces are limited and will be offered on a first-come, first-served basis. I hope my reply helpful and that assures the Action for Assange campaign supporters of what we've done to ensure access is available at the hearing commencing on 7 September. Yours faithfully, Customer Investigations Team.
So I just want to say congratulations. This is something that we don't do this to hear ourselves talk. We do this to make action happen and to get people involved. So I don't even want to inherently, as us, take credit for this, because Action for Assange is everyone involved in this process.
But we would like to give you guys credit.
Right. So I want
Totally.
to say thank you to everyone that took that call to action and put it out there and actually sent those emails, because it did make a big difference. And at this point, all of you that did that have the bragging rights to say you have effectively changed the world, even in the slightest bit. And we're going to continue. Our call to actions are going to get more precise on who and how we communicate and what messages we're sending. So I really look forward to continuing to do this with you guys, because no other content creator has even attempted to try anything like this. And
Kevin
Gostola.
Mad props to Kevin Costola for leading his own one-man campaign to try and make a difference in this too. And we definitely referenced him in that call to action when we were trying to get you guys to jump on board with this. But yeah. So cheers to the good, Kevin. And thank you guys again. That was just well done all around. If we can now, Josh, go to the Nozomi's article in Anti-War and get that pulled up. It's already up. Okay, thank you. So friend of the show, Nozomi Hayase, put out a piece yesterday that has been picked up in a number of different outlets. I first saw it on the Activist post. Antiwar.com ran with it. I am not going to go through the entire article because Nozomi is well, she writes a lot. Like, I've never seen a short piece from her, but we love her, and so we want to highlight this. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange's extradition hearing is set to start on Monday, September 7th, at the Old Bailey, and could last 3 or 4 weeks. Assange has been indicted on 17 charges of espionage and 1 charge of conspiring with a source to violate the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act for his reporting on the U.S. wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and the torture at Guantanamo Bay. Skip there. The gruesome attack on the First Amendment became naked during the February phase of the UK hearing of the U.S. request for Assange. I'm not going to say extradition. Broad daylight fucking kidnapping. On the first day of what unfolded as a grotesque show trial. See, yeah. Assange was subjected to strip searches twice, handcuffed 11 times, and his legal material was confiscated by prison officers. In the courtroom, he was held behind a glass pane in the presence of private security officers away from his lawyers, contrary to the accepted international standard. The prosecution of Assange has always been politically motivated. I'll say that again. The prosecution of Assange has always been politically motivated. Nils Melzer, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, recognized the coordinated abuse of power by Western governments involved in this case. After visiting Assange in prison with his medical team in May 2019, he reported that the WikiLeaks founder showed clear symptoms of prolonged psychological torture. From his house arrest and arbitrary detention inside the Ecuadorian embassy in London to his incarceration in Belmarsh prison, Assange has been treated with extreme cruelty at the hands of the state, and his basic rights have been severely violated. Let's jump down here a bit. Assange's U.S. extradition case is a testimony to the deepening crisis of Western liberal democracy. What has been revealed is a widespread breakdown of systems of accountability and a dangerous trend towards authoritarianism. The sources behind WikiLeaks publication have often sacrificed their freedom and potentially their lives to alert the public to these precise issues. Former U.S. Army intelligence analyst Chelsea Manning released classified U.S. military video depicting the Apache helicopter gunship killing innocent civilians in a suburb of Iraq. WikiLeaks publication of collateral murder video, along with the release of the Afghan war diaries and the Iraq war logs, became a major catharsis for many Americans, causing them to begin questioning the legitimacy of war and the actions of their own government. Disclosure of confidential documents, Vault 7, that came from the CIA's top secret security network, allegedly released by the former CIA engineer Joshua Schultz, exposed CIA cyber weaponry, including their own version of NSA cyber spying with an ability to hack any Android or iPhone, as well as Samsung TVs, and even the electric controls of cars. The excessive power of the agency has been demonstrated by drone attacks and their engagement in espionage during the French presidential election. I want to jump down to the very bottom of this for her closing paragraph here. As the extradition proceedings resume this month, the mockery of justice will continue. In this final moment before the light of transparency goes out, as our society rapidly degenerates into despotism, our shared future calls for an informed public to step up and do their duty to hold power to account. The conscience of ordinary people is our best hope in this darkness. Only through our courage to truly confront injustice and act in solidarity with truth tellers can we end this illegal prosecution of a free press and reclaim our own democracy.
So this is where I want to point everybody to defend.wikileaks.org. They put out a call to action last week asking every supporter to engage in decentralized action. It's something we've been asking people to engage in since
Day one,
61 weeks ago. And what we mean by decentralized action is being the one person in your community or group of people, if you have some close friends that'll go with you. And it's just doing what you can with the time, money, and resources that you have. Whether it's passing out flyers on a busy street corner, whether it's putting posters up on telephone poles, I can't tell you to do anything illegal, so don't do anything illegal, but do what you can with the time and money that you have, because something as simple as a megaphone driving around through a community, just telling people about Julian's case makes so much of an impact that people can't even imagine at this point. So if you are someone of conscience that has been following this case, that knows what's going on, please, in this moment, in this time, take action. You don't have to put it on any social media platforms if you don't want to, but please, if you are apt at putting it on social media, please send it to us. Whether you tag us in the tweet, send it to us directly, we will retweet it and put it out there for you. Because this is something that we need everyone involved in cities across not just the US, but the world at this point, to make sure that everyone knows what the hell's going on for these next 3 weeks.
And you guys have already proven that you can knock that out of the park. So so get on it, get at it. Let's have fun with this. If you're doing anything that you're not supposed to be doing, take the advice of my old man and don't get caught. And if you do get caught, don't call me for bail, because you're not fucking getting any.
And I think the other one was, don't commit a misdemeanor.
That's my brother. Yeah, my now deceased brother. His rule number 1 was never commit a misdemeanor while in the process of committing a felony.
I do, real quick, before we get into the next article.
Okay.
I just want to say thank you to everybody that's helped with the GoFundMe. Just since we've started this stream, we've gotten some big donations in,
wow.
And it's super appreciative. The super chats do help, but the money that comes in from GoFundMe, we get within a day or 2. So any donations that you guys put in during this time, we're not going to raise the goal because we've met it, but any donations you guys do send at this point will only be to help bolster what we're doing out here. In some instances, it may provide a meal for when we're hungry. In some others, it'll provide printing services. So please, if you can, continue to donate and share that link out. But also, there are a lot of other GoFundMes and a lot of other ways to support Julian that is not through us with direct action on the ground. So if you would rather donate to the legal defense funds, do that, Courage Foundation, or through WikiLeaks' website directly. Because right now, financial support in this moment is pivotal, because they're basically trying to run everybody dry. And so again, I just want to put out a big thank you for everybody for helping us get here and do this, because it's something that when we first started the GoFundMe a few months back, we didn't even expect to get half this much.
Oh my God, dude, we were so fucking stressed. You have no idea. We were like, how the hell are we going to be able to raise enough money to get us housed during the Rona? Like, it was a panic. You guys have stepped up amazingly, and we can't thank you enough. We're gonna transition to an article out of Il Fatto Quotidiano. Il Fatto Quotidiano.
Dot it.
Huh?
Dot it.
Dot Italy. That's the country code of origin. Yeah.
Stefania's thing.
Yeah, Stefania's thing. Sorry, I forgot what note I left in the show doc. So this is Stefania Maruzzi, friend of the show, interviewed Kenneth Roth, the executive director of Human Rights Watch. And so when the article's up, the bold question, what's in bold is going to be Stefania, and what is not in bold will be Human Rights Watch Executive Director Kenneth Roth. When Julian Assange was arrested last year, you wrote an editorial for The Guardian arguing that how authorities in the UK respond to US extradition requests will determine how serious a threat this prosecution poses to global media freedom. 1 year later, it is clear how the UK authorities are responding. They have kept a publisher who has revealed war crimes in a high security prison for more than a year, exposing him to the risk of infection from COVID, and they are assisting the U.S. authorities in extraditing him as a criminal just like any other. Is this compatible with freedom of the press in a democracy?
I can read these ones if you want.
Playing the part of Kenneth Colt tonight will be Andrew Smith.
My views
Kenneth
remain.
Roth. not Kenneth Cole.
My views remain that it is completely inappropriate to prosecute Assange merely for publishing government secrets that Chelsea Manning had given to him. And it is particularly inappropriate to use the Espionage Act, which the Trump administration is now doing, because the Espionage Act does not allow a whistleblower defense. If Julian Assange will go before the jury in the United States, he will not be able to say that he did it in the public interest. The U.S. government, even the Trump administration, recognizes the threat that an Espionage Act accusation for mere publication poses to ordinary journalism. So what they are mainly trying to do is portray Assange as a hacker.
Stefania continues, a security expert and journalist who is definitely not supportive of Julian Assange has dug into the allegations of hacking, drawing the conclusion that what he did was not hacking, but rather helping Manning to log into the U.S. government's computers while preserving anonymity. We journalists do that kind of thing for our sources all the time.
I understand that, and journalists often provide ways for sources to deliver information confidentially. That is an ordinary part of national security journalism. The U.S. government alleges that Assange went beyond that and actually assisted Manning in not just concealing her identity, but in hacking the computers herself. I do not know whether that is true or not. I understand Assange claims that he did not help anyone break into government computers. If it is going to proceed with the extradition, it is important for the British government to defend freedom of expression by drawing a clear line, not to be part of the extradition that involves either the prosecution for publication of classified information or the prosecution for assisting the source in delivering classified information confidentially. It has to involve more. The actual breaking into the computers for it to be a legitimate prosecution. And real quick, if we can editorialize for a second.
Yeah, we can go to the next article, really.
Okay.
Or go to the last question. But yes, let's editorialize.
We know that Julian Assange did not help Chelsea Manning hack anything. It came out, I believe, in Chelsea's case, and then also in her court martial, and then also during the first week of the rendition hearing itself, that Julian was helping her download videos and things, which may or may not be copyright infringement, but that's really irrelevant in this situation. So as even he lays it out there, there was no assisting in hacking. She had full legal access to this material. And I think that that's always important to remind people of when this is brought up, because she didn't hack into anything. She downloaded it in a way that secured her anonymity, even though she already had access to these exact same computer systems.
Yeah, I mean, the collateral murder video was literally laying around on an secured for military personnel, but it didn't even require a username or password to view. Like, any intel officer could just go and watch comrades in arms massacre people for sport.
With video game commentary.
With video game commentary, yeah. We're gonna close out this article and jump to the next one. But the last
question. 1 sec.
Someone's asking for the PayPal stuff.
PayPal stuff. We would just prefer the GoFundMe. If you email us info@actionforassange.com, I can share it with you. The PayPal information. But we prefer everything just go through GoFundMe if at all possible, because I think you can use PayPal for that, and that's just actionforassange.com/donate.
So to close out this article, Stefania asks, when we look at this case, what is most shocking is that ever since he revealed war crimes and torture, Julian Assange has never known freedom again. Whereas the war criminals and torturers exposed by the WikiLeaks publications have not spent a single day in prison. Isn't this an upside down world? Stefania Maruzzi, running with the we live in a fucking cartoon narrative.
The U.S. government has a horrible record of prosecuting its own war criminals. This is not simply a matter of the Trump administration. It goes back to Obama and Bush as well. I personally made this argument to President Obama, as he just didn't want to pay the political costs of prosecuting the Bush torturers. This precedent of impunity is dangerous because it suggests these crimes can happen again with impunity, and also weakens the global standard because aristocrats of the autocrats
Yeah.
Of the world regularly point to the U.S. government's failures to prosecute war criminals to justify their own lack of accountability.
And why wouldn't they? If if you're an authoritarian leader in another country, whether it's highly industrialized or backwater as fuck, and the country that propagandizes itself as markets itself as the beacon of hope and freedom in the world is politically persecuting a journalist and publisher to the point where they're going to torture the man to death, what incentive is there for authoritarian regimes to hold back? Like, there's none. It's leading by example in exactly the wrong direction, is what it is. I want to get to the Peter Oborn thing, and we'll close out with that.
Hey, it's the police.
We have to go pick up a Kendra here shortly. So this is the UK journal. Besides Tarek and Mo finally said something about Julian. Josh,
What was that?
the article, my show note is UK journal. Besides Tarek and Mo finally says something about Julian.
Is that the Press Gazette one?
Yeah.
The Press Gazette, yeah. And this is basically a thought experiment, and it's something that if you can engage in this thought experiment with people, it begins. That's the Daily Mail one, Josh, not the Press Gazette.
I already changed it.
Okay. Anywho, let's imagine a foreign dissident was being held in London's Belmarsh prison, charged with supposed espionage offenses by the Chinese government, and that his real offense was revealing crimes committed by the Chinese Communist Party, including publishing video footage of atrocities carried out by Chinese troops. To put it another way, that his real offense was committing the crime of journalism. Let us further suppose the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture said this dissident showed all the signs typical for prolonged exposure to psychological torture, and that the Chinese were putting pressure on the UK authorities to extradite this individual, where he could face up to 175 years in prison. The outrage from the British press would be deafening. There would be calls for protests outside the prison, solemn leaders in broadsheet newspapers, debates on primetime news programs, alongside a rush of questions in Parliament. The situation I've outlined above is nearly identical to the current plight of Julian Assange. There is one crucial difference. It is the US trying to extradite the co-founder of WikiLeaks, yet there has been scarcely a word in the mainstream British media in his defense. The fact that the US is an ally of Britain is perhaps one reason why. That should make no difference as far as the British media is concerned. Indeed, Assange's extradition hearing at the Old Bailey next week marks a profound moment for British journalists. Assange faces 18 charges, 17 under the Espionage Act, which carry a potential sentence of 175 years, put away for the rest of his life. But his case represents an attack on journalism and democratic accountability. If Britain capitulates to Trump's America, with framing, okay, the right to publish leaked material in the public interest could suffer a devastating blow. The British authorities have it within their power to refuse this. Indeed, more than 160 legal experts wrote to the UK government last month claiming they are obliged by international law to refuse the US request. The lawyers are joined by human rights campaigners and health professionals who've been shocked by Assange's treatment in British custody and fear his rights will be further violated if he is sent to the US. The National Union of Journalists supports Assange. General Secretary Michelle Stainstreet has warned that the charges pose a threat that could criminalize the critical work of investigative sources. And yet, there has hardly been a sound from the British press. There are many reasons for this relative silence, but before addressing them, the gravity of the situation at hand must be highlighted in the clearest of terms. Assange is accused by the US of conspiring with whistleblower Chelsea Manning to hack a Pentagon computer, which is just
Incorrect.
I mean, demonstrably through court testimony in multiple hearings.
For a decade.
Demonstrably incorrect. The U.S. indictment says Assange agreed to attempt to crack a password, an attempt which was unsuccessful. Crucially, the indictment also charges Assange with actions that are no different to the standard practices of journalism. Okay, we read about Kenneth Roth. Let's skip down here a little bit. High officer. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just read the last two paragraphs here. Another contributing factor to Assange's pariah status is that he is not judged to be a journalist by a large part of the industry. Reference is also often made to WikiLeaks' decision to publish huge amounts of unedited documents, which the U.S. has claimed put the lives of sources at risk. I don't deny that makes me easy and that he has ethical questions to answer. Uneasy. Yeah, whatever. But it is also true that his case could have a devastating, chilling effect on journalism, and the UK government has the ability to prevent this happening. Future generations will never forgive the current generation of journalists unless we raise our game and fight to stop the extradition of Assange. Yeah, any comments about that there?
I just hope that everyone is ready. Ready to just get out in the streets and do what you can with what you have. Because right now this is the tipping point. These next 3 weeks will literally determine the fate of the rest of humanity going forward until the point that we can organize well enough to overturn the laws which we previously had enshrined in our constitutions and Magna Cartas. So just please, during this time, do everything you possibly can to make sure that everyone in your city knows what's going on. Because without public awareness of this, without as many eyes as possible, it's the hope of getting Julian free is small.
You want to go ahead and wrap? We got to get to Reagan.
Yeah. Once the truck passes.
Right.
But I would like to thank everybody for watching this Saturday's vigil. I would like to especially thank Rebecca for taking time out of her crazy day right now to come on and talk with us. The DEA campaign, I believe, is coordinating with Consortium News right now to put out their own event in support of Julian. And I will try, I don't have chat open on anything. But before we end the show, I'll try to get that link out. If not, just
they've all been bouncing back and forth anyway,
okay,
according to my chat.
Okay, cool. But yeah, so big shout out to them as well for getting that together. Because our hope here is with the vigil has always been to be the smallest fish in the pond supporting Julian. And one of the things that I would like everybody watching right now to do is reach out to whatever content creators that you follow and ask them why they haven't done more. And
you can be as polite as you deem appropriate. Honestly, I mean, there are diplomatic ways to go about doing this, and there are much more direct ways to go about doing this. I have paid a personal price for being more direct than diplomatic, but that's just who the fuck I am. So, whoops. At any rate, thank you guys. We gotta hustle off to the airport. Yeah. Who are you?
Oh, I'm Andrew Smith. You can find me on Twitter at Andrew Zigmund, Zigmund. And just for Misty, you can find us on Twitter at action_4Assange, or action4assange.com. We still do have week 61's call to action up, which is contacting your Congress critters if you're in the US, and asking them for meetings specifically to talk with them about Julian. We're going to be escalating that a bit with direct emails to people for next week with Reporters Without Borders. So I'm going to go through and try to scrape up what political campaigns are going on right now. So yeah, thank you guys very, very much. I truly appreciate you watching and all the support that got us here being able to do this. And I look forward to bringing you the protests that we're going to be putting out.
Hell yeah. My name is Steve Poikinen. I host a show called Slow News Day. If you're looking for it on YouTube, you type in Slow News Day Podcast into your search bar. I'm also on DLive and Rockfin. I will be live from this exact spot tomorrow with the one and only Whitney Webb. Please hang out for that. Regular Slow News Day time, 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. Huge thanks to all of the people who donated during the stream today. Ernestine Wolf, Tony Clay, Kat Terrell, Christian Stefnuik, and Marimiar in the Panhandle. My God, you were busy today. Holy fuck, thank you. Huge thanks to Rebecca Vincent and to everyone who's here with us in DC, because otherwise it would just be me and Andre, and that would be fucking sad.
It'd be kind of awkward.
Really sad. Yeah, love you guys. I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks to Sleepy Josh on the 1s and 2s, and good luck to us all.